So today's, how we got to this topic is very interesting. I started with a fundamental notion that if somebody were to relocate to this town, if somebody were to start a business in this town and it's tech related, I have to have all the bases covered, right? So we have to tell you, okay, if you can't hire fast enough, you can kind of outsource it. If you need, surge staffing, you can basically go to a company that can provide that. You can connect through the talent portal. You can post these jobs. You can connect through Charleston Works. You can basically take a couple of our code camp students. So you can come to a user group and maybe meet somebody who's ready for the next challenge, if you would. So I think that there's a lot of conversation going on in this town about talent. I would like to think of us as just going to it, addressing it. Just, let's go head first and see what we can do. And to that end, our Code Camp Kids program is going to become a Code Camp after school program where instead of teaching 14 kids in this room, we're going to teach 20 teachers at a time who actually will then go out and teach there, and that way we can kind of scale it. And the parents are kind of begging for this. So again, we're what I call solutions oriented. There's no committee that kind of cranks up. There's advisory groups. So when this whole thing got going on, I had a chance to, Dan had come and met with me about a month ago. 2 months ago, basically. He talked about this new group that Lifecycle was kind of spinning up, that he heads up, Lifecycle Talent. And then I've known Drew Weston and CodeLinks, and I guess shame on me, for the longest time I didn't realize, I just assumed that CodeLinks did government work, and I didn't realize they also did commercial work. And so developed that relationship. And so what we have today is a conversation. This is probably, and I kind of scanned the presentation real quick, but this is probably going to be the most comprehensive conversation we have about talent. You kind of see globally what's happening and then kind of bring it down to our level. So I appreciate all of you guys being here. Also, this presentation goes online, the PowerPoint and the recording. So, again, I appreciate Drew Weston from CodeLinks and Dan Coombs, and I'm going to let them take it away. Thank you, John.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for coming. Drew and I are not professional presenters, so bear with us. We don't generally present together, so we'll try to get through this as best we can. The other thing is, just to throw this out as a disclaimer, is this is not a sales pitch for Lifecycle Talent or for CodeLinks. We're just going to provide objective information. Talent acquisition is critical for every organization. Being able to grow, continue to scale as they grow, and we're going to talk about some options. Really the options being hiring, supplemental staffing, or outsourcing. But in advance of that, we kind of have to give some landscape information as to state of the state on a national basis, state of the state locally and regionally. So we'll get into that. I guess to start, Drew, you want to give your background a little bit?
Yeah, so CodeLinks, as kind of Ernest alluded to, we started out in the defense area about 7-8 years ago, kind of with everybody else when the economic downturn hit, and we had the fun of the sequester and things like that. CodeLinks decided and made a concerted effort to go in and kind of branch out to more state, local, commercial, things like that. So the same services we've been offering to basically the DoD for the prior 10 years or so, we then started offering to other groups and agencies. CodeLinks in general, software, security, high-end AV. As Dan said, kind of my role is sales and marketing, but we're trying our best not to make this a sales pitch. Prior to CodeLinks, I spent about 10 years working for Blackbaud, both domestically and abroad. So I've been in the software industry in Charleston for most of my career. So,
cool. My name's Dan Coombs. I'm with Lifecycle Talent. Prior to coming to Lifecycle Talent, I spent 19 years in talent acquisition and IT staffing for Tech Systems. Tech Systems, the nation's largest IT staffing provider. I'm from Murrells Inlet, went to the Citadel, graduated in '97, and then I started in Greenville, South Carolina with Tech, was there through '04. It's been about the last 11 or so years in different leadership roles, running major markets for the company prior to coming on board with Lifecycle. So I've got a different perspective than most people in talent acquisition. I spent time in Greenville, I spent time in Memphis, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, and most recently Philadelphia, South and Central Jersey, and Delaware. So, but my focus exclusively for a 19-year career has been IT, talent acquisition, and staff augmentation. So I think between Drew and I will be able to give you some perspective that hopefully will be valuable. High-level overview for today, IT landscape nationally and in the low country, because you would think one is more important than the other, but they're both interdependent. The future of technology in Charleston. So as we continue to scale, what does that do to essentially the availability of talent here in the local market, and what are your options as employers or employees? Impact to employers. So as the labor market continues to constrict, which it will, both nationally and locally, what are your options, and what's the potential impact that you just need to be aware of. And to hire or not to hire, there's going to be some scenarios where it makes sense to hire. There's other scenarios where it makes sense not to. And last one is just closing and Q&A. By the way, feel free, as we get into this, if you have any questions on the fly, you just shoot them out. We'll try to have a more structured Q&A at the end. So the current state. National unemployment rate for computer and mathematical professions is 2%. And this is all coming from Bureau of Labor Statistics, so I didn't make this up, just so you know. Relative to the national employment rate, you can see it's roughly half as much as general unemployment. Now, this pool of people that they're reporting back are males and females age 16 and over that are eligible to be in the workforce. But IT unemployment is less than half of the national average. And the thing to consider is anybody that's really worth their salt, they're either in a state of transition, meaning they've left an assignment that they're on and they're looking for the next assignment, or they've already accepted another job and there's some lag time. They're taking vacation, they're just going to take some time with their family or what have you before they transition into a full-time role. So we call that frictional unemployment. So when you think of IT unemployment, it's virtually 0% on a national basis.
And I think that's something that everybody in the room has seen and can recognize.
Yep, absolutely. H-1B visa utilization. I'll give you some information here in a second. The H-1 population, extremely talented, well-educated, as you guys probably know. They go into their chosen discipline in primary school, and they really just continue to advance their education throughout high school and college. Many of the H-1Bs that come to the States have master's degrees, extremely well-educated, very proficient in their respective field of expertise. But this just gives you kind of an idea of the visa cap. Now, in 2011, the visa cap was 85,000. You'll see in 2013 it changes to 65,000. What happened there is the federal government delineated, there's two groups. So there's 65,000 visas that can get approved annually, and then there's an additional 20,000 if they possess a master's degree. So the number remains the same, but for the sake of data continuity, there's a couple days variance between when the cap was hit for the master's applicants versus for the non-master's applicants. But you can see in 2011, it took 301 days for that cap to get hit, meaning April 1 of 2010, they open up the application process, everyone applies. It took 301 days till the federal government approved the applications. So that really was hit in, it was open in 2010, it was hit in 2011. Fast forward 2015, it was filled in 7 days. So 43 times faster in essentially a 5-year period is pretty crazy to think. And the demand for technical expertise, if you can't see that American companies are struggling to find great talent and bring that talent to bear, I mean, that's a pretty good proof point right there. This is from LinkedIn. This just gives you an overview of, this is year-over-year growth. This is coming from 2014 to 2015. It's their most recent industry report. Obviously, the larger the bubble that's portrayed there, the larger the growth in the respective market. But Charleston came in fourth place behind Seattle, Washington by 0.8%. So that's pretty impressive. Had the opportunity to be in Austin. I experienced the growth that was there in a 2.5-year period while I was in that market. And Austin's a booming tech center for Central Texas and the Central United States. And they've actually taken a lot of business from Seattle and brought that business into Austin. But as you can see, Charleston's not too far off. I mean, we're right on their heels. So 8% growth there.
What year is that?
This is 2014 to 2015.
I was just curious, is there anywhere like Silicon Valley where maybe it's contracting a little bit?
There are some places, and I have that data. I can get it to you. I'll give you a card.
It's just a curiosity.
Yeah, there are some markets that have retracted and gone backwards, and then there's some major tech hubs that they're already pretty well saturated.
Right.
And they're not going to grow at the same clip that like an Austin would or Charleston would. Fort Myers, Florida. There's a pretty explosive growth at Fort Myers. A lot of that is due to the tax benefit that Florida's offering to their employers coming to the state. And it's pretty lucrative in that they don't have any state tax for employees too. So it's a fairly easy recruit from a tech sector. Drew?
Yeah, so this is actually some of the information. I know Ernest and his team did a recent synopsis of this that you can find on the Corridors website. But this is kind of looking at the metropolitan areas, and you can see kind of the same trend applies, where in this case Charleston was we're still not in the top 10 on this one, but we were one of the fastest growing. So the prior year we were 39, last year we were 17. We upped 22 spaces into the top 20 last year for tech growth in the area. This is part of the Millikan Institute study. The full study can be found out there. Like I said, Ernest and his team have actually done a really good job of already summarizing it down for you, so I'd suggest if you want the details behind this one to go out to the corridor site and pull this down from there. So based off of that, we actually involved some of our friends over at the county and the Economic Development Group. They've actually got a statistician on staff, and they went out to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and pulled some data sets for us. Kind of went back as far as 03 because we aligned it to the corridor start date. And Ernest has similar data that kind of replicates this, but this is at a much larger scale. Before I go into the data, a couple of caveats about it. So obviously the way this is pulled from labor and statistics, if you're familiar with NAICS codes, it's by NAICS code, so it's the NAICS codes associated with kind of the computer science industry. So entities that are not reporting, so your state government entities, SPAWAR, MUSC, CFC aren't going to be in here. All the county and school districts, none of that's in here. And anybody who doesn't identify as the Charleston area as their HQ likely is not in here as well. So all the contractors in the defense complex, most of that data is going to be reported to Virginia, not to Charleston. So, but in general, the N is large enough for the statisticians in the room. The N is large enough. This data is very good. You can kind of see the trend lines on all of these are up. And one of the big things that I want to see when the 2016 data is published, if you look at the company data, it was growing pretty linearly there for a while. But from 14 to 15, it started going asymptotic and had a much, much larger increase. And I'll be curious to see with the 2016 data what that looks like if that trend kind of continues. I know I've had the conversation with Ernest. His goal is to have, 500 companies by 2020 as part of the corridor itself. And it's 3 and some change now?
About 363.
Yeah. So the local data tends to mirror kind of what we're seeing here. This is for the entire Tri-County area, so it is the Charleston metro area. It's not just the county specific. But the big thing, you can see kind of the employment picture has been going up. Obviously, a lot more people are being hired in the area in the technology industry. If you look at kind of a 10-year average, it's more than double of what it was a decade ago. And on the next slide, you can actually see if you apply some trend lines to this, and there are some outliers, but the trend lines all show some drastic increases year over year in terms of new company formation, number of new people being employed in the workforce, and unfortunately for all of us that are on the management side, the pay that comes with each of these year over year is a lot greater than a lot of us would be comfortable with. So.
Cool. The other thing that's actually pretty astounding with that data is that from our standpoint, we don't spend a nickel on marketing. So imagine basically we actually started to market this region for tech companies and outposts. I think then you kind of see it just kind of jump even more dramatically. So the outbound marketing efforts are still geared from the alliance primarily to traditional manufacturing and not tech.
Okay. Just one other thing, and Drew alluded to this or mentioned it, but this is directionally correct. So this is one NAICS code. This is for organizations that report. I think this particular code, Drew, was systems engineers and art and design. Yeah,
so it's a 4-digit NAICS, not a 5, so it's capturing a couple of different NAICS codes in there. But yeah, it is basically the computer systems, programming, design, engineering. Those about 10 different NAICS codes are all in this data.
Yeah. So the moral of the story of that one is, this is indicative of mostly every IT skill set that you're gonna be seeking or that you currently have on your staff and look to grow.
And yeah, and as I mentioned before, some of the largest employers in the area, MUSC, Charleston County Schools, SPAWAR, aren't included in this data set because they don't have a NAICS code. They're not a for-profit entity. So, I did do some statistic modeling on some of this and kind of plotted the data and got the trend lines. And basically looking at this data alone, and Dan will talk about some other outliers here in a second, we could expect 274 new jobs to be created each year, 11 new companies to be formed, and an average salary to go up by $21.50 a year. And keep in mind that's across everything within a company. We know specific to the technology skills that increase is much, much higher than $2,000 a year. The average salary already is up to almost $90,000 a year. And you look at a 2% increase, that doesn't sound that much, but you also have to know that these companies this includes their admin assistants, this includes janitorial staff, everything within the employer. We know the tech skills are actually much greater than that.
And the 11 new companies are tech companies, and they're within a year period?
So this is, again, just looking at the trend line, but it would be companies identifying within that group of NAICS codes.
Got it.
So,
And,
Yeah.
But on an annual basis?
on an annual basis.
Okay.
Yeah, so point of clarification, this is the look back.
No,
This
I get
data,
it.
yeah,
So
this data right here
This is a
is
projection based on the look back.
That's right. So, you have to look to the past to kind of get an assessment of what the future might hold. Now, there's some new variables being introduced into the equation, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I think, and I know that Drew would concur with this, that you're going to see an acceleration, not only in the talent pool here, but the demand for the talent pool here in Charleston. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay, so the Charleston tech sector grew 16% faster than the national average in a 5-year period. And this is what's kind of interesting. So these are just these are inked deals that are on the table. And this is all public information. None of this is proprietary. These are all based on press releases that have been out in the Post and Courier and or on company websites. But what you're looking at here is essentially 6,000 plus jobs coming to the Charleston MSA over the next 5 years. So that's pretty crazy. If you look at the data below, so the South Carolina Department of Revenue recruited 1,700 and some change new jobs. More than 33% of those jobs are gonna reside in the greater Charleston.
1,000, not 100.
What's that?
17,000, not.
Oh, 17,000. I'm sorry. Did I say 100?
Yeah.
17,000 new jobs. So more than 33% of those are going to be in the Charleston MSA, in the region. And so we're building a pretty strong ecosystem. Now, are all those jobs going to be IT? No, absolutely not. There's going to be manufacturing, light industrial, etc. But as you guys know, there's going to be a significant technology component in most, if not all, of those organizations.
I would also add, Dan, to that the one thing that's missing that also factors into that is that existing companies are getting capitalized at a higher rate than before. So in 1 week, we had, and this is unprecedented, I think, in a week, we had Zuby announce a $6 million raise. We had Cedrus announce a $4.2 million raise. And our own company here, Heatworks, basically raised $5 million, and that was in 2 weeks, I should say, 10 days and 2 weeks. So that also leads into hiring. So that's kind of the soft side of basically where these companies are using the money to kind of add staff.
Absolutely.
I do agree with Ernest. The capital, I've heard the critique in years past that there's a problem finding capital in Charleston. Well, the capital is found in Charleston. I know there are a lot of other companies that are in the works that are coming out of quiet periods and are actually going after and getting capital right now. That they haven't inked the deals and haven't put out the press releases yet, but there's more coming.
Cool. So we've kind of talked about the current state a little bit. This is going to kind of turn the corner and talk about more. Now that we've painted the landscape, current state, future state, how's this going to affect employers in the local market? What are some considerations that employers are going to have to take into account as they look to grow and scale their organizations? Elevated attrition within the workforce. Fairly well-known, maybe it's not well-known stat, but the average IT employee gets solicited about 20 times a week for opportunities. So there's a lot. I talk to employers all the time, and they're like, "Hey, we're good," and that's a little bit of a false confidence. You're seeing right now. You're seeing companies cannibalize other companies, and recruit and solicit employees out to move from company A to company B, and that will continue to happen. So there's some other considerations that we have to kind of bring to light.
Yeah, you can see that as well, not necessarily just in the tech employers, but in terms of the increase we've seen recently in those kind of placement firms. So Catch Talent, One in a Mill, all those type firms, as well as the large one, the Cyber Coders, Tech Systems, they're all upping their ante in Charleston to kind of keep up with the demand.
Increase in employers' time to hire and fill positions. If you look back 3 or 4 years ago, it used to take 35 to 45 days to fill a position. Now it's taking 75 to 90 days to fill a position. It's not uncommon, especially in my industry. As I talk to people in talent acquisition, I'm looking at how long positions, they have positions posted from 2014 that they're still challenged to fill. And that's not just Charleston, folks. That's on a national basis. I think a lot of people think, well, it's just because we're a big, small town. That's not the case. Every city, every employer across the country is challenged with the same thing. Additional delays in being able to deploy technology in your environment and or complete technology initiatives. Someone once told me, No project got delayed because the server didn't show up. You know, the code's on the shelf, the server's there. It's the resources to do the work, the skills to do the work, the money to do the work. But you know, if you can't find people, that's going to delay the process. Inflation of pay rates. We talked about that. We're seeing a fairly accelerated growth around pay rates. If you're an employer, I'm sure that you're thinking to yourself, hey, how am I going to keep my employees as we go into this next kind of iteration of growth for the market? There again, that's not specific to Charleston. That's on a national basis. But you know, I think we've enjoyed the luxury of paying below national average in many cases, especially in the startup or venture capital or entrepreneurial environment, because there could be an equity stake. There's a lot of upside opportunity. As companies mature, and that opportunity may be less than it was at one point in time, you know, one of the biggest factors is we're going to have to become competitive on our rates and what we pay folks in the local market.
Yeah, and I did see yesterday that the consumer price index did actually go up for the first time in a while, pretty substantially last month. And for anybody that's not aware, obviously the major driver of that was housing. So the rents, mortgage costs are going up at the highest rate of all of the contributing factors to the CPI. And certainly anybody in the Charleston area has seen the rent prices and home prices inflate drastically in the last few years.
Thomas, you had a question?
Yeah, so you know I'm blogging on this issue. So can you put a specific number to what the national average rate, what Charleston is paying as a guideline? We're paying X, we got to move closer to Y.
I can get with you offline on that because I can give you that information. The challenge is it's segmented by skill set. So, you know, there's not like a computer professional bucket and we're getting paid this here. It's database administrators, systems administrators, right? Systems architect.
What's the top two descriptions of jobs that we're having problems filling here?
I can answer that. Drew, go ahead.
I would say the ones that I've seen the most of, and you could even, again, going back to the CDC's talent portal, it's the basic developers. And for the most part, most of the job postings out there aren't really your fresh out of school, no experience developer. They're looking for somebody with 2 to 5 years experience, some good database skills, some hands-on knowledge kind of thing. So mid to senior career developers.
And can you use the term programmers and developers interchangeably?
I would kind of open that to the tech audience. I would probably not, because you see a difference between front-end skill sets and back-end skill sets. I would absolutely use programmer for more the back-end database type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But people dealing with front-end in terms of UI and layouts and style sheets, that's probably not a fair term. I don't know that they would classify themselves as a programmer.
So if developer is the number one, what's the number two position that's hard to fill?
Yeah. Well, I would say it changes over time, and not to get overly technical, but the software development lifecycle, there's iterations, you know, where you're in architecture or you're in analysis, and what you see is it goes in phases. Generally speaking, right now, I'd say development skill sets are the hottest, and then anything cloud computing related right now or cybersecurity related right now is extremely hot, regardless of the market, whether it's Charleston or elsewhere. You're welcome. This is a big one for employers. If you're an employer in the room, enhancement of employee attraction and retention strategy. I see so many companies in my travels that are relying on traditional job postings. You know, like, hey, I'll post this job on Indeed, or I'll post this job on LinkedIn, or I'll put it on a Monster, and they kind of sit back and wait. And truth be known, that's not a very. You have to have a short-term, a near-term, and a long-term strategy to attract and develop, just like we do in the city. And Ernest and I've talked about this with, you know, there's an education component, there's an active recruiting component, and then there's a long-term attraction component to getting people to come into the city and bolster our technology workforce.
And I will say, to that point, I know Ernest actually had a couple of the state elected officials here last week that some of us met with, and had the opportunity to kind of voice our concerns in terms of growing the organic talent pool and also attracting talent. And you may see some initiatives coming out of some of that in the near term to help provide some voices to that cause, to help drive some of the initiatives to recruit talent in terms of what are the issues they see with the area. Obviously, we know the culture, the nightlife, the dining scene, all that's great. What do the schools look like? What do the roads look like? Things like that. So you may see some of that, some involvement from the corridor with the local elected officials to that end shortly.
Absolutely. And just a point of clarification too, that's when I say employee attraction retention strategy, like compensation's a piece of that, but that's not the exclusive factor in it. And I know there's some companies, I'll use Spark for example, known for their culture here in town, phenomenal culture. That culture doesn't appeal to everybody. So each company has to identify their own culture, and they have to have kind of a value proposition that they're going to present and pitch to their respective employees. And then, one thing that's I think grossly underutilized here in this market is the work from home option. We're still very much a brick and mortar town. We like to have people in the offices. As traffic continues to increase, I mean, believe it or not, and I've seen this in other cities, you'll have people that will refuse to come from Somerville to downtown Charleston. And that's, I don't know how far we're off from that, but I think that's an eventuality.
I know we are directly impacted by 526 and 26 and the expansions, and from personal knowledge, I can tell you there are no improvements coming in the next 5 years. So the 43 people moving in a day are going to clog up those roads through at least 2021.
Absolutely.
We have a company talking about that. For the first time, we have a company that is coming out of their lease next year, wants to live in the new flagship 3 buildings. They'll come into the flagship 2 building for a while. And what they've done is basically they're allowing their entire IT shop to work from home. And they're going to use that as a 6-month to a year experiment to see how it works. And then accordingly, either they've given me a baseline of what they want in flagship 3, but then they might around double the amount of space. So I think, Dan, to the point, you've already got employees starting to think like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just being more progressive. And you see that, in more established markets, just how do we get the best people, versus how do we get people. So just something to think about. Loss of intellectual property and knowledge capital. You can't really put a dollar amount on that, but employee attrition, as you churn, granted you lose somebody, but there's hard cost affiliated with ramping somebody back up into that job. Equally, potentially more importantly, is whatever knowledge they possess walks out the door with them. And it's hard to replace that, it really is. And for anybody technical in the room, documentation, it's key. Most developers don't like to do it really well, but there's only so much that you can capture through documentation. There's a lot of that's intangible, and it just resides with the person who goes out the door. Stronger and more visible succession planning. For succession planning, I mean, most companies have it. Hey, if Dan Coombs gets hit by a bus tomorrow, who steps in behind Dan Coombs? The problem with succession planning, most companies don't make it visible because they're afraid people are going to kind of, they're going to know what they're slated for, and they're going to let off the gas a little bit. But it's really important that your employees know what the career path opportunity is in the company, where they stand relative to that career path, and how do they gain access to that next step in their career. It really helps with employee engagement, and it minimizes attrition.
Yeah, and I can tell you from personal experience for those last 2 that one of the things we've seen, we still have kind of one foot in the defense community in Charleston, and Spaywar's actually been a big victim of both of those, that they hired this large cohort 20 years ago, that now they've got 20 years of civil service, like, all right, thank you, I'm going to go take my retirement check, but they haven't done a good job of succession planning, and all that intellectual capital walks out the door, and then all of a sudden they've got all these new hires that are fresh out of college that don't know how to get things done in that bureaucracy. So that has been brutal to some of the local defense complexes for that reason.
And this kind of speaks to the overarching theme that we're going to talk about today, is just development of a multifaceted talent acquisition strategy. Anybody that's working for a progressive organization, we just need to think about how do we get the best people, and do we need to hire full-time? Do we need to augment? Do we need to outsource? What's really driving our need, and what's the right solution to that problem? Any questions on this stuff before we move on?
I'll make a comment.
Go
As a 20-year programmer engineer, there was, and I know that this is part of what you're talking about, basically the only way to get ahead or to really get a great salary increase is to work somewhere 2 years and then jump ship.
Right.
And you've really got to incentivize your employees with more than 2 just cost of living increases.
That's
every
right.
year, and like you said, make sure they know what the path is to advance their career within that organization instead of having to leave to do so.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that we've also seen is, to that point, that a lot of the younger cohort does do that, where, okay, they'll have 18 months, 2 years at a position and move. A lot of the more senior hiring managers are like, oh, well, I don't know if they're going to be here, I'm not interested. They don't look like they're traditional people they've hired that have 5, 10, 15 years at an employer, and so they're hesitant to even interview those people.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely right. And another thing too, just talking about merit-based increases and whatnot. Like I recently moved from outside Philadelphia, Wayne, PA, to get back to Low Country, and I was shocked having been gone. I left in '97, so having been gone for as long as I had, coming back to the area and how much the cost of living has increased here. It's not far off many major metropolitan areas. In fact, in some cases, it's more expensive here than it is in other areas. So, can every employer just throw money at people? No, absolutely not. That's not the answer. But there's things that will keep people, and if you make them public, if performance reviews and knowing how to advance your career, knowing what's important to them, keeping them educated, giving them exposure to cutting edge technology, there's a lot of different things that employers can do that they kind of take for granted that they've got somebody on their team, and it's just a missed opportunity. So to hire or not to hire, and we painted the landscape about what's going on in the country and in the region, and we'll speak to this just a little bit. But again, this isn't a sales pitch for us. It's really as we talk about what's going on in the economy, in the IT community, in the local market, and in the national market. How do you as employers or you as employees, how do you determine what's the best course of action? To accomplish what you need to accomplish and align business or IT with the business. So I'll let Drew talk about the outsourcing piece and just when that makes a lot of sense, and we can kind of walk through the top two. That's kind of in my wheelhouse. But hiring, if I'm an employer, especially if I'm a startup, I want to keep a very entrepreneurial feel in that organization, and I want everybody to have a vested interest. It makes sense in most cases to hire, but there's cases where it may not. It depends on how quickly you think you're going to become cash positive and if there's a sustained need for the business. So if you're looking at employees as being instrumental in long-term growth and building the foundation of the company, I think it makes a ton of sense. If there's a sustained need for that employee, I think it makes a ton of sense. But there's some pitfalls, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Augmentation, when I think about augmentation, I'm thinking about contract resources, contract to hire resources, or potentially a managed services model. Burst capacity work. You've got your staff to the point where you can keep the lights on, you get hit with a large chunk of work. You don't know if you're going to need those resources at the end of that project. There's a lot of downside to hiring and then releasing workers in the local market. It doesn't do anything for your brand, certainly doesn't do anything for your reputation and your ability to recruit downstream.
In that respect, Charleston is still very much a small town. The word gets out, and it is still a small community in that regard. If you burn somebody, that word can get out.
No doubt about it. Project-based, we're talking about project-based. If it's something with a defined start, defined finish, and you're unsure of if there's another project on the heels of that, it may not make sense for you to hire somebody full-time. And the last thing is uncertainty around the long-term sustained need for the resource. And I see this, my parent company's in the DoD space. Drew's company had a history in the DoD space. You see a lot of these guys and girls that are on projects, and they're year-to-year or multi-year projects. And at the end of the project, it's like, well, what are we going to do? Sometimes they get rolled over to the next provider, but there are unfortunate circumstances where they just get cut because they didn't get awarded work or they're not needed by the next provider.
And I will say in that space, because we still, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we have one foot in that space still. When those contracts happen and when they do those layoffs, okay, we don't have this contract anymore, or the work just goes away altogether, they'll let the non-technical staff go. So the tech writers, the BA, some of the PMs, all that type of stuff is what they'll let go. They don't let go of their technical staff. They'll repurpose them to somewhere else. That they know that need is there, and they'll find a home for them. So,
absolutely. And then this is key, I think, with either the outsourcing model or the augmentation model, but the lack of the resources, the skills, or the time to deliver work. And those are really like the couple variables that you always have to battle, right? Is do I have enough people on my team? Do those people have the experience? And if I leverage my existing team and they do have the experience, do I have enough time to use that team, keep the lights on, and get this work done? So from an augmentation standpoint, those are the big variables. There is cost affiliated with that too. So do you have the budget? You could lack the other three and not have the budget, and then the net is you got to make do with what you have.
Yeah, and this is a spectrum. I mean, this is not a digital 0-1. There are varying degrees to all of this. And our side of it, as Dan kind of alluded to, is more project-based. We look for more outcomes, things like that. But the big conversation is as you go through to more the augmentation, the outsource end, you never want to outsource your core competencies. You want to outsource things that detract from your business. They're going to slow you down. Your core development, that's not something you outsource. There are certainly opportunities in town or experiences here in town where you've seen people have done that and it's come back with a resounding failure. They've dropped 7 figures on outsourcing one of their core products. The product they got back was undeliverable. They had to spend another year and another $2 million to rebuild it internally because the outsourcing failed. Don't ever kick out your core competencies. If you need to say, okay, well, and I can give you a personal example, I won't name the company. There's a company we work with locally, they've got a big Java stack, Java Oracle. They have a project coming up where they have to do a specific integration that requires .NET and SQL. That's not their skill, that's a project they should outsource. Trying to take Java developers and plug them into a round peg square hole, that's not a good plan. Let them keep building their stack, continuing that line, and let somebody else help them with the skill sets they don't have, that kind of stuff. Those are the type of things you want to outsource.
Cool. Drew, you want to elaborate anything else on the outsourcing model?
Yeah, one of the big things that we've seen, and kind of moving in between the augmentation and the outsource area, a lot of the time we see some of the needs from the projects we take on where you do need the full software development lifecycle involved. So, I could hire one developer for the cost of $50K for this period, this 6-month period, but that's one developer. What I actually need is a developer, someone to write requirements, someone to do QA, someone to do the DevOps, someone to actually go through and PM all these moving pieces and parts and interface with my team, all those type pieces. So you can get a full software development team to approach this for kind of the same cost as you were bringing on one W-2 employee that only brings you one skill set. The other thing we've seen is there is a lot of need for this type of stuff, particularly more in the startup community, where, okay, yes, I've got my own developer, that's great. You're trying to get a product to market or to get to an MVP so you can get capital or across the line, whatever it happens to take. Well, you may have, again, a developer and someone on the sales side of things, but if you're trying to get equity, if you're trying to go to some of these larger companies, they're going to see, all right, is your code escrowed? Is it documented? Show me what the QA looks like. What are my support resources? Those are the type of things that when you get to more the augmentation outsourcing end, you can bundle all of that together and approach as a project rather than just say, okay, I need to hire one more QA person. Because in most of these cases, you don't have a 40-hour-a-week need for a tech writer, a QA, a DevOps. You might have a 10-hour-a-week need. And those are the type of things where, again, it makes more sense on this end of the spectrum rather than that end of the spectrum to look at those type of outsourcing options.
Yeah, and just a couple more things. Does anybody know what loaded cost to hire an employee means?
All too well.
Yeah, I know you do. You're a business
Anybody in the
owner.
defense community
Yeah.
definitely does.
So, anybody want to take a stab at what it means? So,
Includes insurance.
shy group.
Yeah.
Includes insurance.
If anybody's ever been through a DCAA
Yeah.
audit, you definitely know what
Yeah.
it is.
So, thanks for taking a stab at it. So, loaded cost means it's the total cost affiliated with hiring an employee. And a lot of times when I talk to companies and they're like, hey, we're going to hire that person, we're going to hire them full time. And my first question is, hey, totally understand if you've got the need and you know it's a full time opportunity, that makes sense fiscally and otherwise. But what's your primary driver in hiring the person full time? You know what the answer is 80% of the time?
It's just how we do it.
Cost.
Yeah.
It's cheaper to hire full time. And in reality, I just read a study from MIT. Your soft cost, which it's not really soft cost, but the cost above and beyond salary to hire a full-time employee is anywhere between 40 and 60%. So if you're hiring an employee, let's say they're a $100,000 a year salaried employee, your total cost for that employee could be $160,000 a year. In many cases, if that need's not sustained, you're better suited to go to an augmentation model or go to an outsource model. So that's one thing. And then the other thing around hiring, Drew talked about fractional utilization of resources. Meaning, if you hire somebody and they come into your organization, let's say they're a Java developer. Most Java developers, you know what they like to do? Java development, right? Do you think they want to do technical writing or requirements gathering or QA their own code? No, they don't really like that. And that diminishes overall employee engagement. So, if you don't have a full-time need for someone to do Java development, and you're going to shoehorn somebody who's been in an organization doing Java development into a role where they're then responsible for the full SDLC, employee engagement's going to go down, and the likelihood of that person attriting is going to go up. So now we're fortunate in this market. We have a lot of full lifecycle shops where people do more than just code or more than just QA. But just keep that in mind if you're going to hire.
One of the remarks I'd make to that point is what we're seeing right now as the community matures. It's just like you had in a fractional, like your accountant that you bring in to kind of a bookkeeper or your legal. Now we're actually seeing with this town, we can get a fractional CTO. And I tell people, I said, the tendencies of, I just want this. But if you're architecting a system that basically, I think that when they rolled out the Obamacare, I guess, how the system just kept crashing. They didn't anticipate fully the need, the number of people who are going to hit the system, and then to go back and go back. So what you're seeing is, I've had recent conversations, as we start looking at the whole town module with just a couple of folks. Michael Wright, for example, who is the, engineer at People Matter. Now he's got a company and he's a fractional, CTO in a couple of companies. So you may not need him, but you still have to have an architect. What's the overall game plan? What I see is sometimes, a couple of what I call code jockeys running around, and they're like, "Oh, I'm working over here," and I just feel bad for the companies that hire them because they don't have the big picture. You got to have the big picture and kind of work down. So what you're seeing, and I'm sure you guys know this better than this, is a combination between augmentative and outsourcing.
Absolutely.
But I think this is probably the most insightful slide of, it's sort of a combination of all these three.
Yeah, and I guess the one takeaway I would have if I was running an organization is, just know what it is that you need and why you need it, and really try to get to the root cause of that before you just make a quick reaction and try to go out. To Drew's point, you don't want to outsource stuff if it's core to your business. You want to outsource stuff that's more repetitive, mundane, lower risk tasks. You might not want to augment your staff with a contract to hire resource if it's a sustained long-term need of the organization, or it's going to affect your culture negatively because you're a very small entrepreneurial environment. But you certainly might not want to hire somebody full-time if there's some other things. A few other just like things, risk points that I think employers overlook a lot is, I've been in this industry since 1997. There was a large period of time where we were hiring a lot of 1099s for corp-to-corp contractors, and a lot of times employees fail to understand that the insurance requirements, like the indemnity insurance, workman's compensation insurance, that all falls on the independent contractor. So let's say, for example, I run an outsourcing business, and my contract with the government says that I have to have $2 million worth of liability insurance per instance, per occurrence, and I hire an independent, and that person comes into the organization and they don't have the flow down insurance requirements, that employer, if something happens, my outsourcing organization's on the line for it. If they don't pay their taxes, let's say they just decide because they're 1099 and they're not going to pay federal income tax, Uncle Sam's going to come looking for somebody, and if it's not that resource because they don't have the liquidity, it's going to roll back up to the employer. So just a couple risk points there. The other thing is with hiring full-time, and it depends on the size of the organization. Larger organizations have a very challenging time with performance managing someone out of the organization if they're not legit. I've sat with people in interviews, multiple interviews, and you think they're pretty solid. Then they get into the organization, and they're really not as good as they made themselves out to be. It could take you 6 months, in many cases a year, to really performance and manage that person out of the organization without there being any risk or liability to you as a company. So just a couple risk points worth mentioning. Any other questions on this slide? And then we're kind of bumping up against our window. We'll open up for Q&A.
Yeah, and I would say a couple other, again, because I have one foot in the DoD realm as well. One of the other big barriers to entry we've seen is that, okay, I need clearance. One of the hats I personally wear right now is the Assistant Facility Security Officer, and I can tell you that DSS and OPM gave a presentation to us in April that basically said right now to get a new interim clearance, you're looking at 200 days. I got an email at the beginning of this month that said, well, we haven't gotten any funding since April, so nothing's changed. Go ahead and tack on 60 more days to that. So if you're working on a contract that requires clearance, things like that, if you try to hire a new developer that doesn't come in with clearance, forget about it. You can't build them for up to a year.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on this before we open it up? Q&A? Just anything? All right. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you. Appreciate it. Nobody threw any fruit or vegetables at us. That was nice.
Dan did proof through them first, make sure there's nothing.
I know. Yeah. Any questions? Any thoughts? Parting shots?
You said that there was a study about the on-cost being 40 to 60%.
Yeah.
Do you know what it is in this market?
You know, I don't, because a lot of that information is it's so variable from.
It's from company to
yeah.
company, I would get that, but like the state would, and in Charleston
I-
City, the tax rates.
Yeah, I don't write
which is
off.
closer to 40 or.
I don't write off, Garth. I could, there's so much variance.
Yeah.
I know the MIT study that
Yeah.
they did, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was they pooled and researched on a national basis.
Yeah.
I can try to find out what the sample size is and get back to you.
And likewise, the Charleston County Economic Development now has a statistician on staff and a data person, and I
Right.
can kick that question to them and see if they can answer that.
Really interesting to know.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that, Garth.
I can personally tell you that my fringe alone runs 40% for
40%,
me.
okay.
And we received a 39% increase year over year in our insurance this year.
If I could just add, when you're talking about the fringe costs and the cost to onboard, obviously you have your standard stable costs, which are your payroll taxes and things like that, and then your fringe cost, which every company should have an average number that they know what their fringe is, but that's going to include, what you're paying for vacation, what you're paying for PTO, sick time, all of those factors, holiday, but also what you're paying for your health insurance, dental, vision, life insurance if you offer it, disability, all of those different factors. So it's going to be variable for every company. 40%, I would say, is on the low end for most companies because just the healthcare costs alone at this point, and companies are choosing to go with different plans, but the rates that they're paying are still increasing substantially every year. So if they're not passing all of that on to the employee, then their fringe benefit is going up exponentially every year, and we're seeing a lot more of the high deductible plans and companies passing on some of that cost to the employees because it's just astronomical. But I would say 40% is definitely on the low end for a company that offers a standard benefits package.
Yes, sir.
Well, you're seeing the cost of employees going up, and then you have inflation on top of that. So if you look at the compounding, that curve's going that way. What are you seeing from the outsourcers, the cloud providers? Are their costs going up or are they going down?
It's a great question. I'll let Drew speak to the outsourcers. What I can tell you is there's a lot of people in the services space that they don't really keep up with what's going on in the market. They don't keep up with the trends and supply and demand models and stuff like that. So you've got a lot of folks, in my experience, from working not only here but elsewhere, that whether they're DoD or commercial, they haven't gone back and adjusted their rates to their customers in some cases for 4, 5, 6 years. So they're still charging rates from 2011 when the economy was really soft. In some cases, they're in the red on the work that they're delivering. In regards to like the cloud providers, and my guess is, and this again better suited for Drew, but my guess is that they're losing money as they roll out these services, and they've got a period in time in which they have to bill enough hours and enough enough customers to break even and become cash positive.
Yeah, we are a Microsoft Gold partner, and we've seen it in some of the raw services coming down from the OEM. So obviously AWS has increases, Microsoft Azure has increases, those type of cloud offerings, we definitely have seen it there. But in the space in general, it is going up, but part of it is driven by market factors. The offshore option is kind of a downward pressure on that. So while prices are going up and they're going up higher, faster than inflation, they're still being weighed down by the competition from overseas. I know for most people in the room, I get several calls a week from Pakistan and India. Would you like to outsource to me?
You're seeing, I'm in that outsourcing
Yep,
space.
yep.
And I can hear the SDLC on you guys. Here's what you get on the outsourcing space. Hardware's getting cheaper.
Mhm.
So your products are going up, but the cost is going down.
Right.
So when you look at outsourcing, you lose that burden,
Mhm.
you lose that 3% inflation, and you get market pressure and cost of goods
Yeah.
sold are going down. So that outsourcing is staying flat, or because market pressure going down. So on those things that aren't core to your business, I think more people need to look at that serious, because there's a big paradigm shift that you guys are talking about, because it's not gonna get easier. And
Yeah.
there's more competition for those good talent.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, every industry right now is under cost pressure, and the economy's, you know, it's trending in the right direction, but it's still sputtering along. You know, we're not back to the period of time yet where people are frivolously spending money.
Right.
You know, so until that time, you know, cost is going to be an issue. But you got to decide if you're going to hang your hat on, you know, innovation, you're going to hang your hat on quality, or you're going to hang your hat on margin. And I can speak for myself personally. Our focus is quality. So, Thomas?
Just 3 quick questions. Clarification, the Florida state tax benefit, because I was pretty surprised in the prior research I've done, I was not aware of this growth in Fort Myers, Tampa, St. Pete, and Orlando. Can you just clarify that what that offering is that they're doing?
Yeah, in every state, as you know, like their recruiting efforts are pretty high.
Yep.
I can't tell you exactly what the corporate
But
benefit
what do
is.
they do? So they're not charging state sales tax to,
Well, there's no in Florida. There's no employee income tax.
okay. got it.
So there's a few states in the country that don't have employee income tax, and Florida's one of them.
Mhm.
But they're offering just tax incentives to the organizations to come to Florida, very similar like Texas, very similar to South Carolina with some of the expansion work that we've got here. And if you think about Florida historically, it's not a real. I mean, most people think of Florida as either travel or entertainment or retirement. So, you know, as you can imagine, they're trying to draw organizations to the area, just like we did in Charleston, going back. How many years ago was that, Ernest, you started kind of doing this?
2000.
Yeah.
Okay, so no employment income tax and tax incentives you attribute to that rise.
Yes.
Second thing, as far as, I don't know if there's an old term, languages that developers, is that still a term used?
Mhm.
Is Java, okay, so what are the top 3 that we are having a problem attracting? Is it Java one of them?
Java is very hard to find in town.
Great, what else?
A lot of the front end skills I've seen issues with. The .NET is so-so, and some of the more web-based languages we've seen
So
that
can you
are.
give me some names? So Java, and what are the top 2 others that we're having problems finding?
Like I've seen a lot of a lot of job postings for things like Python, Ruby on Rails, things like that that are more web-based applications, and those are typically ones that are more not given in academia. So you're picking up those skills outside of more the traditional.
Yep.
That's not being taught in college, or you're taking an online course or something like that for it.
Mhm.
And more, we've actually seen a lot of that with some of the Iron Yard and things like that, where they're trying to offer more of those skills,
Yeah.
those type of resources.
I'll take that offline. The last question, this could be for Ernest too. So has there been any analysis of folks that we're trying to recruit that wind up going somewhere else? What are the top 3 reasons we are losing against other cities?
I can't see, Ernest, I don't know if you have analysis on this.
I mean, I don't have, data, but I wouldn't say that we're losing by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I think that,
But if we lose someone, is it because of we don't work from home options? Is it schools? Is it compensation? Is it affordable housing? What is it?
I'll take a stab
Sure.
at it. I mean, I think having come most recently from Philadelphia in that Jersey, Delaware corridor, it's really tech-centric. Having been in Phoenix before that and Austin before that, I think the biggest thing is some of those markets are known for being technology hotbeds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if I'm moving from Wisconsin to Philadelphia to be in the life sciences space, the likelihood of me getting a life sciences opportunity at the end of my contract, or if something, let's say they lose patent on a drug and they're trying to figure out what am I going to do next, is extremely high. And I think that here in Charleston, from an outsider's perspective, people aren't aware of how large the tech sector is
Okay, so
here.
we're not telling our story, right?
Right. I don't. We have a great story to tell. It's a
But
phenomenal story.
we're not telling it out there.
I think an area of opportunity for us as a city is to come together as employers and kind of evangelize that story to the outside market.
Great, so that's one. What would you put the compensation on there too, in the top 3 of why we're as far as from a competitive point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a factor, right? So if you're bringing in, let's say you're bringing a hard-to-find skill set, somebody that's really strong with Amazon Web Services, and you're going to go to Atlanta to get that person, or you're going to go to Chicago to get that person, or another major metropolitan area where demand is really high, they're going to get paid a premium for living in one of those like metro areas, and then to bring them to Charleston where maybe the cost of living isn't as high as Chicago. in their mind, they're going to have a hard time computing the cost of living adjustment.
And I've seen a difference between recruiting a single, more millennial type person, where someone that's more mature, has a family, looking at the suburbs, looking at education, things like that. The millennials are easy to recruit. Charleston's great. It looks well. But if you've got a family and you're looking at, okay, do I move from Atlanta to Charleston? Well, what's the school system look like? What do the roads look like? What's my commute look like? What kind of house can I get for my money? Those are definitely a negative factor in that regard.
Yeah, and Dan, to your point too, you know, from my perspective, and I've been.
What's your perspective? What do you do?
So I do talent acquisition.
Okay.
I'm partners with Dan,
Okay.
and I've supported all of the enterprise IT hiring for lifecycle engineering for the last 4 years. And what I can tell you about recruiting, you know, developers and high demand IT people in this market, number one is definitely the size of the market.
Okay.
Now, Charleston is growing. We got some great tech sector opportunities here, but when you put it into perspective of other major metros, Charleston is an exceptionally small market. So if you're looking at high-end IT talent that has any specialization in any type of application or software, the opportunities here are very limited. There may only be 1 or 2 companies that use that technology because although Charleston is growing, we have relatively few large-scale companies or corporate headquarters that are going to have those types of needs and requirements here in this market. Number 2, I think, and all of these things, that would by far be my number 1 response to that. There's several different things on the list, and it's always relative to the person because depending who they are, where they are, what point in their life they are, they have different priorities. So compensation is definitely one of those things, but it's a combination of compensation and cost of living that always go together.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing that the cost of living here is rising, and you know our compensation is not rising as quickly as other markets or as quickly as the cost of living here. So that's definitely a challenge as well. So I mean, there's a lot of things, and to somebody else's point that talked about millennials and things like that, we don't have a whole lot of opportunities for flex working or teleworking, and a lot of when supply and demand is out of balance like it is right now, and it's accelerating, that differential is accelerating, people have more leverage. Your talent has leverage over which opportunity they're going to pick and why. And some of those things don't cost a whole lot of money for an employer, but mean a lot, especially to millennials and the younger generation. Having that flexibility to work remotely is a big thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would say particularly deep skills at the PhD level is a really good example. There are just not opportunities. If you've got that level of education and experience and basic level research or advanced research, if you're doing that for some of the companies in town or Spaywar or someone like that, there aren't other opportunities outside of that. We're losing those to bigger Atlanta, DC, Charlotte,
Yeah, and to Monica's point, I mean, I strongly believe that you're going to see the landscape change from a technological standpoint significantly in the next 5 years. You get a lot more enterprise class customers moving here. You know, in the past, it's been a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, startups, and you know, from a cost and scalability standpoint, they're not leveraging the same technologies as you know, BMW manufacturing is in Greenville. So I think that you're going to see an uptick in very high level skill sets, enterprise class technologies. But in the current state of the state, it's changing every day. But the demand for those skill sets is less here than it would be in a Charlotte, in Greenville, Atlanta, etc.
I think to add to that group, so a great example is Brad Elmenhurst, who's the director of engineering at Boeing's on our board. And if you look at the conversation when he thinks, you know, he's thinking Microsoft, he's thinking Cisco, so he says it's just a matter of time before they choose to locate. So the enterprise companies start moving to this market. And I think to the point that these guys are raising, you know, that's coming. Now you've got Volvo, so you look at what technology they're using, you know, in their manufacturing process, and so you start to build a case. I think Monica raised a good point, and I think this is very important, right? I tell people, I said that if you don't the nice thing about the presentation you saw was that is normalized data. There's no basically ad speak added to it, from these two guys. They did exactly what I would do, which is to take Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the data you see here, it's one organization that puts the data for the entire country. But it's also important to understand it's relative, right? If the data's been normalized, we're still a small community who's 15 years young. And so you can get really disillusioned if you set these stupid goals that you just are totally unachievable, number one, or basically some of the organizations that are springing up thinking they're going to have results overnight just so they can get a byline in the paper somewhere. We've been at it for 15 years, and what's important about this presentation is how are we just going to layer it? How do you just continue to layer, resources? And these two guys are part of that layering. The fractional, in terms of the technology, is part of the layering. The reality is that we've lost a lot of the PhD types as kind of the Spay establishment shrunk. But my biggest resource right now on our code camp program is a PhD, who's the former chief technology officer for BMC Software at Austin. He's moved to town. After he became an empty nester, he left BMC, went back and got a PhD at Texas A&M, paid for by the Fed. So he's got 2 years of indentured service basically with spay warning, so I want to get back out in the commercial community. So he's looking at all the opportunities right now, hugely talented guy. So I think what you're seeing is, to the question about losing, I think you kind of have the answer. There are some opportunities that are highly technical. Most of those opportunities, what was interesting was, and I always tell people this, I said, our growth in terms of the data really came because of the federal establishment. The commercial guys coming up were nice, but I think now you're going to see more and more sort of commercial, companies, start to enter the market. The other thing I would say is, from an infrastructure standpoint, we are better positioned today than we were yesterday, right? So next week, this is absolutely strategic on my part. You got Kristen and I kind of keep things kind of going. So we're not a 8-person, 10-person organization. Next week, we will announce the Buford Digital Corps. We're the 5,000 square foot facility in downtown Buford. So there's a company that comes in here, basically ex-SCAD guys, basically, and I said, Jose, you don't need to be here. You need to be in Buford. He looked at me. 2 of the 4 teams in the startup basically live in Buford. And he was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. The USC Buford is across the street. It literally is 2 doors down from where the incubator is going to open. And they have a data analytics program. So why, so kind of the city manager said, he said, I've been in your office, man, the damn phone keeps going off like every 5 minutes. You're kind of distracted, and you're busy, and why? And that's because if we think of Buford and Charleston as one area, one zone, you start to kind of grow up, so there are people who live in Buford who now have opportunities, who might have some family who can come down here. Conversely, somebody might choose to have a small office in Buford because they can get 3 guys over there and they can have to get down. So I think there's all these different, to Drew's point earlier, there's high interest right now from the legislature as to what we do. And now, finally, after all these years, I'm kind of providing some input because of the relationship that's developing with the state. So this is all, again, I think it's a nice way of saying, I'm really proud to say, basically, we couldn't have this conversation 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So the resources, we didn't have a data center in town. They said now, if somebody says, hey, we need a cloud solution or hybrid cloud, and you're really interested in holding onto your box, we'll take your box down to what do you call this Parkway, to Medion, and now you can have it. So these are things. The infrastructure is growing, the companies coming in are growing, the people are kind of migrating in, and I would agree that, and now the development alliance, I think most of the development alliance has got a campaign to actually kind of raise awareness. I wouldn't call it a recruiting campaign because this is not like you can't recruit talent like you recruit companies. The world's kind of changed. There's a reason why talent kind of moves around. And we can only go so far to say we've got a great lifestyle, because there are a lot of other high lifestyle communities as well. The last thing I would say at that point is, when the corporate guys come in, this is a philosophy basically that Secretary of Commerce Head has. He says, and I don't fault him, but in his mind, you go after the Boeings, and you get all these companies that support Boeing. You go after the Volvo, you get all these companies that support Boeing. So he thinks that basically we'll grow just by focusing on some big targets. And I'm glad they're doing that. What we've got to do is kind of support the little guys. So some of what you're hearing might, is great, but I want the next startup to come in and say, honestly, we need this, this, and this, and I've got to have answers. We can't say, let's have a committee, and let's figure out how we're gonna solve this. We have solutions, and these two guys represent two of the solutions.
Ernest, if I could just add to that. So I was in Austin from 09 through 2011. And when I was in Austin, when I first got there, Dell was the largest employer in the Austin MSA by far. So you had Dell in Round Rock, and then you had like AMD, and a lot of the suppliers for Dell were there. Fast forward 2 years later, eBay's there, PayPal's there, VMware's there, Facebook's there, Google's there, and really what they needed in order to make a corporate investment in the community was they needed to know that they had some critical mass of IT skill sets, and that there was a ecosystem that they could tap into. So I think that the work that the corridor's done over the past 15 years and all the employers in the Charleston market have done has got us set up for a really, really explosive period of growth. So if you're in IT and you're a job seeker, I would not in any way, shape, or form go, shoot, I'm in a bad way right now because there's not a lot of stuff going on. To the contrary, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's just a matter of, we got to kind of band together and ensure that we're getting the name out there for the Charleston market, and that they understand what the resource availability looks like here in town.
Well, I appreciate your presentation today again, Drew and Dan, and hopefully you'll learn something from this. They'll be around for a couple of minutes, and we're happy to, if there are resources that you guys need, I'd go to a town page on the CDC site, certainly let us know. We're happy to make introductions and, with credible resources and done. So thank you all for coming out today.
Cool, thanks guys.